Welcome back to Munchausen's Proxy, and as you can tell by the thumbnail, this is not the third spoiler review for The Witcher: Blood Origin, because I forgot when I recorded the audio for the last video that The Last of Us series premiered Sunday on HBO. As you can also tell, I'm still working my way back from being sick, so please pardon the voice. I did a review of the first trailer for the show back when it came out, and I was fairly complimentary based solely on the trailer. I wanted to do a review of the second trailer that dropped over the holiday, but I couldn't find the time given everything that was going on, and then being sick. As I said when I reviewed the trailer, I am a complete Last of Us normie. I never played either the original game or the second game, and the only thing I know about it is what I saw when the second game was released. I know Neil Druckmann, the creator, and Naughty Dog, the development studio, and Sony, the parent company, all tried to obfuscate what they had done with the second game, and went so far as to strike YouTube channels that discussed leaked scripts and stills of the game before it was released, claiming that the leaks were wrong, which they weren't. Neil Druckmann and company were trying to gaslight fans of the first game until the second game was released to cover themselves because they knew by the reaction online that this was going to be a disaster. And it was. Unfortunately, Neil Druckmann has been involved with the series production, and the showrunner for the show and certain actors from the show have all been saying unflattering things in the press and online about the games and the fans. Having said that, I came into the show with an open mind, much as I did with House of the Dragon and its legacy from Game of Thrones Season 8, despite actors and others involved with that production coming out with rather distasteful statements in the press before House of the Dragon premiered. I want these shows to be good, and companies like Warner Brothers and Amazon and Netflix all have the money to make good programs and movies. That they don't is entirely on them. We no longer owe Hollywood the benefit of the doubt. So I go in with an open mind, but I no longer assume it will live up to my expectation for good. Especially when those involved with the productions put so much effort into making sure that they have lost all credibility by crapping all over fans or the source material that fans are coming to the show or movie to see. With that said, I heard before the premiere that HBO did change some aspects of the show that will probably irritate those who are fans of the first game. They did the nigh obligatory race swapping of characters that Hollywood simply cannot resist doing, no matter how idiotic the race swapping is. They have also changed certain aspects of the actual story, adding here and there and modifying certain other things. Whether I, as a normie of The Last of Us, will notice is debatable. I do know one race swapped character actually was pretty decent, and I will expound upon that later. I have also heard that they will be using material from the second game in the series eventually, and that they might end the first season where the second game is at its most controversial. But that has not been confirmed in anything I have seen yet. It's just rumors at this point. Given what I have heard about the second game, that seems like a poor creative choice and a massively squandered opportunity for both HBO and Naughty Dog. Now that the lead-up is out of the way and the disclosures made, let's get into the spoiler review of Episode 1 of HBO's The Last of Us. And settle in, because this review is correspondingly long as the show was. It starts off in 1968 with a talk show, and two scientists who debate their differing views on pandemics. Scientist number one worries that increased popularity of air travel will increase the likelihood of global pandemics via virus or bacteria shuttled in airliners full of people packed in like sardines for hours at a time. Scientist number 2 thinks we can handle that sort of thing, but worries more about fungi, making the audience laugh. He explains that fungi can alter and or take over a host's mind, making it do things it normally would not do. He uses as an example a fungus that takes over insects, particularly ants, and makes them do things that are detrimental to the ant, but allows the fungus to propagate. The first scientist thinks this is nonsense, that fungi are too restrictive in their habitat needs. Scientist number 2 retorts by saying that if the world warmed just a little bit, then the fungi would have reason to adapt and mutate to meet the changing climate, thereby making it possible to infect and survive in humans. And in this one scene, you get a depressing hint that maybe the writers on this show will not be able to help themselves, as they manage to cram in a couple of the usual Hollywood crusades within a few minutes of showtime. A show, by the way, that ran for an hour and a half, and it felt every bit that long and more. Next, we jump forward a few decades to Austin, Texas, on September 26, 2003. A girl wakes up and hurriedly gets out of bed and wakes up her father before going down to cook a birthday breakfast for him. Her Uncle Tommy comes in just after Dad and daughter have a back and forth over pancakes and their lack of mix so she can make some. Dad and Uncle talk about a construction job that they have going on that day, and Dad promises to pick up a cake on his way home, and they all rush to leave. The kid, Sarah, goes up to finish getting ready, and on her way out, grabs a watch and some cash from Dad's dresser drawer with a furtive air about her. At first, I thought she was stealing before being summoned to the car by a honk, so they could drop her at school before they go to work. There's a short interaction between the three of them and the neighbor who is feeding his mother on the stoop next door, Dad promising that Sarah will visit after school. Sarah looks bored in her last period, zoning out and remembering to take notes every couple of seconds before the bell rings and she bolts to catch a bus into town. She goes into a pawn shop and gets the watch fixed. While that is happening, emergency vehicles scream by the shop a couple of times. The repairman is working on the watch when his wife comes rushing out of the back to bustle her out. The repairman gives her the watch before she leaves, fixed. The wife tells her in a worried voice that she should go straight home before slamming the door and flipping the sign to closed. Sarah goes to a neighbor's house and does her homework before being roped into making cookies. Later, she is looking at some DVDs when, behind her, the semi-comatose and wheelchair-bound old woman starts twitching. The kid doesn't notice, but goes to ask if she can borrow a DVD before heading home. As she leaves, she notices the dog is sitting and staring at the old woman, whining. Outside, she sees fighter jets roaring overhead before she goes to her house. That night, she's on the couch reading a magazine when Dad comes home, sans cake. He is late, and he starts explaining the work mishap that kept him, before stopping himself when he sees her staring blankly at him. He says he will get the cake tomorrow, and she tells him he does not get his present until he promises to remember the cake. She gives him the repaired watch, saying that it is something he never would have done for himself. She then shows him the DVD she borrows, and they put it in after he asks her if she will fall asleep, which she does. Dad is watching the movie, Sarah zonked out with her head in his lap, when his brother calls from jail. He begs Joel to bail him out because it is crazy down there, and if he does not get bailed out that night, he will be in all weekend since it was Friday. Joel carries Sarah to bed before going to get Tommy out. Sarah is woken from her sleep an hour or so later by helicopter spotlights. She realizes her dad is gone and goes downstairs. She gets worried because she hears more helicopters and sirens, so she turns on the TV, only to see the emergency broadcast system and the voice telling everyone to stay indoors and authorities will give further instructions shortly. She is startled by the neighbor's dog jumping on the window and whining, and goes outside to pet him. She looks around and notices the neighbor's door open. She goes to investigate, and when she gets inside, she calls out for the neighbors. She hears a noise in the kitchen and walks in to find a smear of blood on the floor and the husband sitting with his throat torn out. She approaches him only to come around the kitchen island to see the semi-comatose and wheelchair-bound mother feeding on the throat of the wife, and she just stands there watching. The mother raises her head and she has tendrils coming out of her mouth as she looks up at Sarah. Only when the old woman gets up to go after her does she run. Joel arrives with Tommy as she hits the street. He yells at her to get in the truck as he jumps out, carrying a big wrench. Tommy has a rifle as he gets out and both look spooked. The old woman comes out charging at them, and Tommy asks what to do when Joel bashes the old woman with the wrench. Sarah is in shock, and he turns to tell her that it is not just the Adlers, and that they have to be brave. They get in the truck, and Tommy turns it around only to see the neighbors running at them. He hits them with the truck and keeps on going. When they get to the main road, they see a bunch of police cars go screaming by. Joel tells Tommy to head for the interstate, and Sarah asks what is going on. They tell her that it is some kind of virus or parasite, and that is all they know. They say it is mostly in the cities, and she worries because she went into the city to get his watch fixed. As they drive, they pass a car stopped on the side of the road with a family waving at them to stop. Joel tells Tommy to just keep going. When they get near the interstate, they run into a traffic jam of people who had the same idea they did. Joel says to cut across the field, only to find that the interstate is blocked by the army, forcing them to continue through the field northward to find a road. The road they find takes them into a town, and as they drive through the streets, planes start flying overhead. The road they are forced onto is a chaotic mess of people, but Tommy, for some reason, now has qualms about hitting people with the truck. They begin to reverse to avoid the crowds, and just then a plane crashes behind them, spraying debris down the street towards them. The truck is hit and they get flipped upside down. Sarah has a broken ankle, and she and Joel are separated from Tommy when a police SUV slams into their truck, exploding into fire. He tells Joel to head for the river and he will find them. Joel picks up Sarah and heads for the river, but the first corner they come to, they run into people feeding on dead bodies. One of them sees the pair and chases after them as Joel ducks into a building. They run through the building and out the other side with the infected chasing. It is about to catch them when an army soldier shoots it. He tells them not to move as he calls in what he found. The person on the other end of the radio orders him to shoot them, and he does, fatally wounding Sarah and grazing Joel's ribs and knocking them down an embankment. The soldier is about to kill Joel when Tommy shoots him. Joel crawls over to a dying Sarah, pressing on the wound and trying to pick her up. She dies, and the screen goes dark. 20 years later, we see a child shambling down an overgrown street heading towards a ruined Boston. The kid walks towards a guarded outpost and collapses. 2 guards go out to get the kid. They bind his hands and strap him to a wheelchair and bring him into the enclave. A black female guard asks the kid some questions while the other scans the kid. She tells him that they will give him some medicine and then get him his favorite food and some new clothes and all the toys he wants. The other guard injects him, and the female guard assures him he is safe. They cut to a burn pit where people are throwing bodies, including the kid. Joel is one of the workers, and the female he is working with him tells him she can't toss the kid in. He picks the kid up and puts him in the pit. At shift end, they lined up for pay vouchers, and Joel asks the boss if there's anything else today. Boss says nothing until tomorrow when they have street sweeping and sewer maintenance available. Joel asks which pays more, and the boss says the one with the and he takes it. We get some views of the enclave, including loads of beat-down looking people and curfew signs before they show a group of people being publicly hung for leaving the enclave without permission. Joel is watching them announce the crimes when he is summoned to an alley by a soldier. The soldier pays him for some hydrocodone pills. They also talk about a deal for a truck and those buying seats on the truck when they leave. The soldier then warns him to stay off the streets for a few nights because the Fireflies have been blowing stuff up and a few soldiers got shot, so his boss has everyone working doubles. It makes them grumpy and tired, a good formula for mistakes in the dark. Then we meet Tess, a woman who is stuck in a room with a guy and his 2 minions. They have apparently roughed her up a bit because her face is a little pummeled. The dude, Robert, apparently sold her a battery for a truck and then reneged, sold the battery to someone else, and pocketed the money she had already paid him. Robert is trying to apologize for beating her up and screwing her over in the deal because he is afraid of the guy she works for. Tess tells him she will just tell the guy she got jumped and they can forget the whole thing. Just as he agrees, the wall of the room explodes inward, seemingly killing all but Tess, though Robert looks to have bugged out since his body was not in the room when she comes to. When she crawls out of the building, she sees a burning Humvee on the street, the apparent cause of the explosion. She tries to walk away, but at the first corner she sees some soldiers and they fire at her. She ducks back around the corner just as some terrorists start firing on the soldiers. She sees more soldiers coming from the other direction and tries to surrender to them, telling them that they were shooting and she had nothing to do with it, but they beat her to the ground and arrest her anyway. We then cut to a kid chained to a wall in another building. The door opens and she stands to face off with the woman who enters with a clipboard. The kid kicks her food tray at the woman, but she ignores it and asks the kid to count to 10. When the kid counts too fast, she tells her to do it again slowly. She then holds out her hand before the woman can ask, and she is told to state her name. The kid says Veronica, and the woman and her guards leave with the kid threatening them, since she is apparently someone important. Then we see Joel walking down a hall full of people queued up outside of a room. He cuts the line to some protests that he does not even acknowledge. Inside the room is a radio set up, and people queue up to get word to and from people outside of the enclave. He gives the radio man the cigarettes that were part of his payment from the soldier. He asks about his message that has not come from Tommy. The other end of the radio connection has not seen Tommy since he last sent a message. The radio man says it hasn't been that long, but Joel says it has been 3 weeks, and Tommy had never been more than a day to respond to his messages. The radio man tries to reassure Joel, but Joel pulls out a map and tells the man to show him where the radio tower is. The radio man balks, telling him that it is in Wyoming, and as good as Joel is, there are worse things out in all of that open land between Boston and Wyoming besides infected. Raiders and slavers and other things. This only makes Joel scoff at his reassurances vis-a-vis Tommy being okay. Joel goes back to his apartment and pries up a hidden floorboard where he keeps tools and maps. He starts looking at the route west from Boston while drinking and popping pills before falling into bed. Later, a woman, who turns out to be Tess, comes in and falls into bed with him, passing out with him. In the morning, she tells Joel she got jumped. When he notices the cuts and bruises are old, she tells him about being locked up by FEDRA, the Federal Disaster Response Agency. She also tells him that Robert sold the battery, and she promised him that Joel would not hurt him. But what she really wants is for them to hunt him down so Joel can hurt him. Bad. She tries to calm him enough that he won't go tearing through the city and spook Robert into going underground, which he will if he hears that Joel is on the rampage. They agree to find out, quietly, who got the battery so they can get it and get in the truck to go find Tommy. Elsewhere, a woman enters the Firefly headquarters, the group that has been blowing crap up and shooting soldiers. When she enters the commander's office, the lieutenants want to know why they are blowing up random crap, and shooting random soldiers, all meaningless targets to Fedra, and why they have some girl locked up, but the guards won't tell them who she is or why they have her. The woman tells them to just follow orders, that they are in a fight against a military dictatorship, but they haven't gotten anywhere in 20 years of guerrilla fighting. She explains that the goal is to distract the troops so they can all leave with the girl, heading west. She sends 2 of the lieutenants out and shows the final lieutenant a message she received on the radio, and the woman immediately pledges her support for whatever the commander needs. Joel, meanwhile, is waiting for someone in a small courtyard when a guy sidles up to him. Joel looks at him and tells him that if he starts preaching at him, he will break his jaw. The man goes away, and Tessa joins him with the location of Robert and where the battery is going. The chain girl is trying to break the chain. She gives up when she gets dripped on by a leaky ceiling, sitting down away from the drip and cursing. The Firefly leader comes in with a bag she throws to the kid, who immediately roots around in it and comes up with a switchblade. She tells the leader to unlock her, but the leader asks for a thank you for saving her. She then unlocks the kid and asks her how she feels. The girl ignores that and asks to leave, promising not to tell anybody about what she saw. The leader taunts her by asking where she would go, back to federal school? When the girl tells her it is home, the leader says it was she who put the girl, Ellie, with the Fedra for her own safety. Ellie asks why a terrorist would do that and why she can't go home. The leader tells her that she is important and that they are leaving. She tells Ellie something that gets her cooperation, but we don't see or hear it because they cut away just as she starts to speak. And we wind up back with Joel and Tess, breaking into a building locked with a chain. They go downstairs and into a subway beneath the building. They find the door out of the subway they are looking for and get spooked when the room they wind up in has an infected glued to the wall, with fungi, I guess. Apparently the infected is how they end, with the fungus just exploding out of them and dying. They head up a ladder to a blocked door that has blood and gunpowder smell leaking from it. Pulling weapons, Tess bowls through the door only to find a very dead Robert with the battery they were looking for. Unfortunately, the battery is corroded and useless. Other bodies litter the hall, and they hear a noise from around the corner and go to investigate. Joel sees the Firefly leader and lieutenant helping each other stand and shamble down the hall. He goes towards them when Ellie bursts through a door with her knife and Joel puts her on her ass after disarming her. He is about to shoot her when the leader asks him not to. She is important. Joel recognizes the leader, calling her Marlene. Marlene tells him they needed the battery more than he did, and that Tommy is just one man, demonstrating she knew what he planned to use the battery for. She says that since they are wounded, Joel must take the kid and get out of the city. She says that if he gets Ellie to the old state house, they will give him a fueled-up truck, guns, supplies, whatever he needs to go find Tommy. Tess gestures for him to talk to her in private down the hall, and she asks him if he trusts them. He argues that Fireflies usually have used Fedra stuff, so they would stand a better chance of reaching Tommy than in the scrounged goods he could get for them. Tess agrees that they will take Ellie on the condition that they get whatever they want before handing Ellie over, and any tricks and they will shoot the kid. Marlene agrees over Ellie's objection, telling her to get her backpack, that she is all that matters. The three of them, Joel, Tess, and Ellie, walk through raining streets to reach his apartment. He shoves Ellie into the room so he can talk to Tess and plan what they are going to do. Ellie looks around, flipping through a book of old music charts and finding a handwritten list of radio codes. Joel comes in and lays down on the couch. When Ellie asks what he is doing, he tells her he is killing time, and she can figure something out to do. When he wakes, Ellie tells him he mumbles in his sleep, before saying she had never been outside the wall, noting how dark it gets. She asks him if he does it a lot, and when he last went. When he tells her it has been a year, she asks if he knows where to go and if they will be okay. He asks her what her deal is, if she is someone important's kid, and she replies that it is something like that. She then tells him that the radio came on while he slept, and he urgently asks her what song it was. When she tells him some of the lyrics, he curses, and she smiles and says she broke his code. Tess comes in then and tells them a good spot to go and that it is time. Out on the streets, soldiers patrol with loudspeakers, telling everyone that there is a mandatory curfew to fight infection and insurrection. Joel and company come up through the asphalt via a trap door after a truck goes by. Ellie is a dumbass and stands straight up and loudly says, "Holy I'm outside," before Tess pulls her down as a spotlight crosses where she stands and shushes her. Tess tells her to follow her lead, and Ellie says of course. They move out with Joel looking less than thrilled. They dodge patrols with spotlights as they progress through tunnels and from debris heap to ruined building to wrecked vehicle. They round a corner and run into a soldier taking a piss. He grabs his rifle and tells them not to move. He is pissed off when he sees it as Joel, and Joel realizes it is the guard he was dealing with earlier in the episode. He tells them that he is taking them in by the book as they try to bribe him with the proceeds of their run. He scans all of them, but when he gets to Ellie, she attacks him, knocking the scanner out of his hand. Joel gets between them and tries to settle things. The soldier looks like he wants to shoot Ellie, giving Joel a flashback to his daughter Sarah being shot, which drives him to tackle the soldier and beat him to death. Tess picks up the scanner and sees it was positive, looking horrified. Ellie hurriedly tells him that she is not sick, that she was infected more than 3 weeks ago, and no one lasts more than a day. After staring at each other for a long moment, Tess starts off again, Joel grabbing the soldier's rifle and following. Back at Joel's apartment, the radio comes on, playing a song. Then they show a view of the rain-soaked night, lightning illuminating the cityscape they are heading towards before the credits roll. My thoughts on this show are mixed. I had certain expectations about what The Last of Us would be based on what others have said about the games. And those expectations were not met with this first episode, long though that episode was. So, setting those expectations aside, what did I think of this opener for the series? Well, my thoughts are still mixed. The episode comes with 3 acts, their opening scene with the scientists not included, and only one of them really worked for me. Which kind of surprised me because it is the act with the race-swapped character that was talked about most in the lead-up to the series premiere. Sarah worked. Her chemistry with Joel was fantastic, and, stupid writing decisions here and there aside, the entire first act of this episode was pretty good. And I guess that is why I'm so mixed on this. Hyped up expectations aside, this first act between Joel and Sarah made me look forward to the rest of the episode. And I was let down. The middle part of the episode dragged ass all the way through, to the point of making me look at the clock and check to see how much more of this I had to sit through. And I can't say the final third got much better, because it didn't. We quickened the pacing a little bit, but only a little bit. I'm not crazy about Pedro Pascal thus far, which is probably a bit of why the majority of this show was just not clicking for me. And yes, I know that I will be in the minority on this. Currently, after 3 days, The Last of Us sits at 99% critic score and 96% audience score at time of recording. The critic score goes down to 94% when you look at top critics, so I'm not completely alone in being less than blown away, though we are a tiny minority. I was also not crazy about Bella Ramsey as Ellie or Marlene as the Firefly leader. Of the characters with significant presence in the first episode, Tess was probably the only other one besides Sarah who made me appreciate their performance. She was tough and competent and made me believe her in the role she was portraying in a way some of the other actors did not. The world building is also going a little slow for me as well. I had to look up what Pedro was, and a couple of other aspects of the show as well, all of which should have been explained by the show in the first episode. I will give credit to the set and costume departments on this show because they are doing a hell of a job. The sets looked real and lived in, realistic for a post-apocalyptic world that is slowly going to hell in a handbasket. The writing elements presented thus far have not displayed modern Hollywood's complete lack of anything resembling talent or creativity, which was a surprise. Granted, they are basically reworking a video game that gave them everything they needed, and this was the first episode, so there is still plenty of time for the writers to make me change my mind. But thus far, there was no rings of power, cringiness, or blood origin, mental retardation. The story was coherent, and the dialogue was not making me want to punch the actors every time they opened their mouths. There were certain scenes that did not work for me. The first scene between Marlene and Ellie comes to mind. But my overall feeling about this first episode was that it was a promising start that disappointed once Sarah was dead. I am hoping that now the main characters are out of the enclave, things will pick up and improve. In other words, I still have hope. It is reminding me of the first episode of House of the Dragon, which had scenes that gave me hope it would be good, but it also had scenes that made me think it was simply going to be another current-day Hollywood mess. I guess the second episode will show which way they are going to go with this one. And here's hoping it is more of a House of the Dragon thing than more of the same from the clowns running the culture right now. Warner Brothers has talented people working there, but they also have people who thought things like Velma and Watchmen were a good idea. The fact that Neil Druckmann, the brains behind The Last of Us 2, and its fiercest stormtrooper in the cover-up of what was coming before the release, is involved with this show also makes me a bit leery. Quite a bit. Next week will tell me a lot about whether this show will improve for me or whether it will be another slog to get through. And as I said, I know I am in the minority on this, but my opinion is what it is. I appreciate you watching this long. I know it was a bit of a run through since the show was an hour and a half long. My next video will be the third episode spoiler review of Blood Origin, and I hope to get that out in the next couple of days. If you like what I do here, please hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment or constructive criticism below. It does help out with the YouTube algorithm, and I appreciate the support. For those interested, I will link my review of The Last of Us trailer in the description, as well as my social media and Patreon. And I will see you in the next video. Tschüss.